welcome to So Easy. Today I thought we'd take a step back from some of the other projects we've been doing recently and go back to something a little bit more simple. I realised that I need some new pot holders for my kitchen, and although I've done tutorials on pot holders and various of the different skills in the past, I've never done a video. So if you'd like to have a look at how you can make a quilt-as-you-go pot holder, stay tuned because we're going to be making a scrappy one. So this is my Quilt-as-you-go scrappy Thanksgiving or fall pot holder. Now, as you can see, compared to my hand, it's pretty big, and I wanted to make something a little bit different this time. Normally if I'm making a pot holder, they end up this kind of size, and that's fine for picking up, you know, the edges of your casserole dishes, but I'm notoriously clumsy in the kitchen, so I needed something bigger so that when I use it, it covers more of my hand and right up here on my wrist so that I don't get burned. And look at this one. Ta-da! I put a little pocket on the back, so it also makes it much easier to use. When I want to pick it up, I can just slip my hand in the pocket, and then I can use the pot holder like this to pick something up, so two at a time, because I'm going to make a matching one now, and they don't fall off all over the place. So I've made it much bigger. It's going to be easier to use, it's going to keep me from getting burned. It's got this handy pocket on the back, and because it is bigger, it means I can put it down on my countertop or on the table, and I can actually use it to put hot pans or plates on too. So it's a little bit more versatile because of the larger size and the extra pocket on the back. So I'm going to show you how to make one. So I am making mine. As you can see, I've got fall colours on mine, but they are a nice item to make either from any of your scraps or matching to some other project that you've got, or a seasonal item, or something if you want to give a welcome housewarming gift to a neighbour or anything like that. They're ideal for these kind of projects. So save all your little bits of scraps. These, for example, are the size of scraps that we're going to be using in this example, and everyone's got little pieces that are like this, so do keep them because you can always use them on these kind of scrappy little projects. So let's get all my materials together. Finished size of my pot holder is 9 inches square. You can obviously make yours whatever size you like. The principle is exactly the same. So I like to give myself plenty of space to work, so I've cut myself a starting piece which is 11 inches. So I've got an inch all the way around the outside just for trimming and working. And this is going to be the backing. So this is the solid piece that we've got on the reverse just here. So I'm going to turn that over. Time to talk about insulation. Typically when I've made the pot holders in the past, I've used a product called Insul-Bright. It's a type of special thermal insulating batting or lining which you use for oven gloves and pot holders and things like that, but I am all out because I have just made another batch of something which is a pattern which is coming up on the site soon, and I've used up all of my Insul-Bright, so I'm just going to use some of this fleece. You should ideally use something like a cotton batting, or you know, even if you've got an old towel or something you can put in there, anything which is going to insulate. So I'm going to use the fusible fleece, that will take care of it. I'm going to use a couple of layers, so I'll add the fusible side down to the fabric, and then I'm going to fuse another piece on top, and that will just give me that amount of protection that I need to keep my hands from burning while I'm using my pot holder. So I'll go and fuse these pieces first of all, and then I'll come back. I've now got my fusible fleece lightly fused in place. We don't need to worry too much about it because the sewing and the quilting is actually going to be what holds all of our layers together anyway. So if the product that you're using isn't fusible, then you can either spray baste it or just roughly hand baste it in place, or even not baste it at all and just wing it. So the first one here, I made these little scraps, the main ones here, 5 inches wide by 2.5. Some of the pieces of fabric I've got left over now are a little bit smaller, so these are 2 inches by 5. And I want them just slightly offset. If you ever decide to do something like this, you either want to make sure things are either directly set in the center or they're deliberately off center so that it doesn't look like it's a mistake. So I'm just going to set mine kind of off center, put them kind of somewhere here, for example, I don't know. Remember that you're going to trim the edges off anyway, so you don't have to put them right up to the edge. Well, unless you want to, in which case you can put them all the way up to the edge. Entirely up to you. It's your scrappy pot holder, you do what you like. So we're going to be using the quilt-as-you-go method, which means that we're going to put our first piece down here, and then when we add our other piece of fabric to it, we will sew the two together and we'll sew through all layers so that we end up quilting at the same time. If you have a look on the back of my original pot holder, you see where I have the pieces joined at the seams just here, and this is the quilting on the back that forms when the layers are sewn together. So it quilts and sews all in one go. So previously I had them all layered, kind of squared, and it all looked very regular. But I think this time, because it's kind of scrappy, I'm going to make it even more scrappy. So I'm going to go slightly offset. So instead of just matching it exactly, I'm going to offset mine a little bit. And now once I've got these two pieces layered right sides together, I'm going to join them. So I'm going to sew from this point to this point, and then when I open them out, it'll be on a little bit of a jaunty angle like that, and I'll just finger press and then we can move on. So I'll do that first one and come back and we'll have a look and see how it develops from there. So there are my first two pieces. So now I'm going to take another one, and again I could just line it up exactly, but I'm going to put it at a jaunty little angle and then sew along this seam and open it up. And I can do the same with some of my other scrappy pieces. So I've got this one here, again I'll put it at a bit of a jaunty angle, sew at an angle, and then I can carry on. So each time I sew at an angle or straight if you prefer, fold the piece back and then use the next edge and join the next piece, and so on until I've completed all the way from one edge to the other with all of those pieces. I'll go and do mine, see what it looks like. So you can see the slight difference here, and the one that I did originally, I used wider pieces and I put them very regularly down here. Here I've used smaller pieces, I had smaller scraps, so that's what I was able to use, and I put them more in a staggered design. So you can use whatever kind of design you like to, and they'll still be matching, providing they're still the same colours. Hey, they don't have to be identical, do they? Okay, so we've now got this centre part taken care of, and we need to put a panel on each side. So if I just bring my fabric over, doing the panel on the side is going to be nice and easy. That fits on there just fine. So I'm just going to put my piece of fabric so that it covers all of those raw edges. Now if I wanted to, I could bring it in as much as this, or I can take it right up to the edge, or I can even put it at an angle, whichever I want to do, and then just sew along here with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, following the piece of fabric which is on the top. So I'm going to do that now. I will go along here. I'm going to use a bit of a jaunty angle because I used an angle on some of these other ones, not too much. I'll sew that with the 1/4 inch seam and then fold that back over, and we can trim around the outside. So that's my first side piece just sewn on there, and now I've got it sewn on, I can just roughly trim around the outside. Remember that we're going to be trimming this all to size and shape later on. So that's the first one, and we can now do the same on this other side. So I can either cut a piece of fabric which is going to fit, or I can sew it on this way and then fold it back and trim it. Either way will work. So once we've done that, we need to think about doing some additional quilting. So I'll sew on my other side just here, and then we'll have a look at quilting options for it. So all my scraps are pieced together, and I'll put that to one side. Let's have a look at the quilting that I did on this one. So on these sections here, I didn't bother doing any quilting. I just went with the seams that were already sewn on there. On the larger sections on the side, I just did some parallel straight lines that followed my original seam, and you can see those there, and you can also see that reflected on the back. So remember, whatever you do on the front is going to be reflected on the back. This one was quite a plain back. This other one is a bit more busy, so you don't see the quilting quite as much on this kind of pattern. So if you don't want to see your lines, then pick a busier print for the back, and obviously pick a bobbin thread which is going to match your fabric a bit more. For me, this isn't the Sistine Chapel, I don't have to worry too much, they're just for my kitchen, so I'm quite happy. And by doing the darker quilting like this, it does help me to show it to you a bit more on the video too. So I've done the straight parallel lines. You could also do diagonal lines or a crisscross shape. For this one, my machine actually has something called a serpentine stitch, and it's like a little wave like this, and if I set it to its maximum width and its maximum length, I think it will do quite a large smooth curve. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to follow over this edge, and then I'm just going to echo it out to the sides until I run off the edge, and we'll see how that looks. So here's my scrappy piece all completed and quilted. I don't know if you'll just be able to see, I've used this serpentine stitch here, and because it's more organic and wavy, if you're a bit worried about accuracy and getting your lines all even like this one, then use one of your decorative stitches, or even if you want to have a go at free motion quilting. This is an excellent kind of project for that, because it's easy to get it under your machine and move it around to do your bit of free motion quilting practice. Okay, so now I've got this all set, I need to trim it down, because you can see there's bits on the edges where we've got bits overhanging or not quite meeting the edges, and I want mine to be 9 inches. So let's have a look. I want to keep this corner just here, so I'm going to put my ruler here where I want to keep, and I'm squaring one of these lines up here just with one randomly there at the bottom. It actually squares up quite nicely. So I'm going to trim off this part here with my rotary cutter, and then up at the top make my 90-degree angle, and if I turn it round, I'll put my 9-inch mark over on that corner there, square up everything. Oh, that's 10. There we go, that will be my 9-inch mark. Beautiful. And now I can cut off those extra parts that I don't need, and end up with a nice square scrappy pot holder ready for me to put my binding on. So there we are on the back. You can see the same quilting lines that we've got on the front, and we're all ready to go with the binding. So I got all overexcited talking about binding, because of course our pot holder has an optional extra. It's got this pocket on the back so that you can hold the pot holder easily like this. So we need to add that before we add our binding on. So I've got my pocket piece here. This is in 9 inches wide, the same as my finished pot holder. So it's the same width, and then I've made it 11 inches long. I'm just going to fold it in half and press it, take it over to the sewing machine and do a couple of lines of top stitching on this fold, like I've got on this one just here. So I'll do that, and then we can just baste that in place. Okay, there we go. Now I've got my pocket. I don't know if you can see, but very closely up at the top just here, I did one line which was close, a straight stitch, and then another line with that same serpentine that I used with the quilting, just so it ties in with it a little bit. You know, it's something where you can practice all kinds of decorative stitches or whatever you want to use. So here's the back of my pot holder. It doesn't really have a right side and wrong side, up side and down side. It's got trees on, but they're a bit random. Anyway, I'm going to match my pocket like this and just use a few clips. I love the Wonder clips. Okay, so now I'll just baste that in place on those edges just to hold that pocket nicely there while we do the binding, and the binding will be coming up next. So time now to add our binding, and I don't know about you, but I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with binding. I love the way it looks when it's finished, and it looks, you know, nice and neatens our edges, and you can add a nice pop of colour and things, but sometimes I just hate doing it. It never comes out right. So I've got some tips today to make it nice and easy for you. So let's start on how much we need. For a start, I've cut my strips at 2 1/4 inches wide. I might normally use 2 inches, but we do have some quite thick layers here, so I've given it just that little extra bit, and it's also going to help us to catch the layer on the back too. And we need the length to go around the perimeter, plus maybe about 4 inches. So I've got about 40 inches prepared. And we're going to sew it on the front of the pot holder first. This is going to be my front because obviously the pocket here is on the back. So if you start somewhere central on one of your sides like this, and you want to turn up the start of your tape there at a 45-degree angle like this, and just press, and then set that point here somewhere in the center of your side like that. And then I'm going to clip it on this side down towards the corner. And when we sew, I'm going to start right here on the edge of this tape. We'll trim this extra little bit off afterwards, so don't worry about that. But we'll start here. I'm going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way from the start here down towards the corner. But when we get to the corner, I'm not going to sew all the way off the edge like you might expect. I'm actually going to stop 1/2 inch before the corner. So I can give myself a little mark. I can just fold the fabric back and finger press here just to leave a little crease about 1/2 inch from the edge. And I know as I sew down that I want to stop and back stitch at that point. So I'll do that first of all, and then we'll talk about turning the corner. So I've now sewn the first leg of our binding just here and stopped 1/2 inch before this edge. And now up here, we don't need that little bit of extra fabric anymore, so I've trimmed that off, so we've now got a finished edge just on here. So now it's time to turn our binding. So if I turn it towards me, the way I normally work, and then what we need to do is fold the binding up so that it's going to be following this line just here. So if I show you that again, I've got my binding here. This is the edge it wants to go on to next, so I'm going to fold it away from that edge so that we've got a straight line just here, and then just press that with my fingers. Now I want to bring it back down so that it's following that edge that we want to sew, and up at the top we've got a nice little right angle just there. So I can put my clips now in place, and I'm going to sew right from the edge on the corner just here all the way down, and then stop a 1/2 inch before we get to this corner, and then we'll practice that turning a corner again. So here's my second side of the binding sewn on here. Time to turn the corner again. This is the side that I want to sew next. I'm going to fold the fabric so that it goes away from that side, and we form a straight line here. Just give that a little press, and then I'm going to bring it back down so that it's level with this side here, and it's going to be level with our next side. A few pins to hold it in place, and then I'm going to start sewing again here, follow my 1/2 inch seam all the way down, and stop 1/2 inch before this corner. You get the idea now. So now I'm almost finished. I've just started on my last corner just here. I thought I'd stop and show you what's happening next. So we've got where we need to join our binding. Now, if you're a perfectionist and you're a experienced quilter, by all means, you know, join your binding in a fancy way. But just for if you're a beginner with your binding, we're going to make it nice and easy, not do anything too complicated. And we're just going to take the binding and lie it directly on top of what we did before. Now, if you have a look where your seam was here, I'm just going to overlap by, you know, maybe 1 inch. So I'm just going to make a mark just there. That's about where I need to finish sewing. So I'm just going to carry on with my seam line all the way up here until I'm 1 inch or so past the previous place where I started sewing. So now where I have the overlap on the binding just here, I'm just going to go again around a 45-degree angle and cut off and throw away the excess. So now it's time for us to reverse the binding. So if you just take it and fold it to the other side, you should see that hopefully, if you look closely, you've got some really nice, neat corners just here. Let's have a look how mine are turning out. Yep, they look pretty nice, so hopefully yours are looking the same. So fold all your binding now to the back. And it looks kind of funny, but it's going to work out just fine. So we'll pull it nice and taut in those corners, and now we fold the binding in half. So where we have the raw edge, you fold it all the way until it meets the edge of the pot holder, and then fold it up again and put a clip. And you should find that our binding is generous enough that it's going to more than cover this original line we had here, which is the line of stitching from the front. So you carry on doing that all the way. When you get to the corners, you have to fuss them a little bit. So I start in the middle always and then work towards the corners. And we want our corner on the back ideally to look nice like the corner on the front. So we need to just fuss it a little bit so that one folds down first, and then this other one, I've not picked the best corner here because I've got a seam in the way, so that doesn't help. But you get the idea. You fold one, then you fold the other. You get that nice mitered corner. So I've folded up one. Got my binding here. And if I fold them nice and neatly, I get a nice mitered corner. Do you see that there? You just put my clip. If I fold them nice and neatly, also get a nice mitered corner that I'm going to sew on the back. So I'm now going to continue folding this binding and clipping, or pin if you have a pin, you can use pins too, and fold that all the way around. Actually, I'm going to reverse my clips because when I want to sew from the front side, so I'm going to reverse them so that the flat side of the clip will be then on the bed of the sewing machine. So I'll do it that way. So I'll continue to do all of that and then we'll have a look at how we're going to sew. So I have all of my binding in place now and it's time to stitch it on. Now when you're starting out with binding, the thing that people struggle with the most or complain about the most is when they sew the binding on the second time. Typically you'll sew from the front and you'll try and stitch in the ditch or just stitch very close to the edge of your binding, and then what happens? You miss the binding in certain places on the back. It shifts a little bit as you sew and then you've got a little bit where it hasn't been caught by the stitches and it sticks out, and that's annoying. So it puts people off from doing binding a lot. So if you're a super quilter and you know what you're doing, by all means sew in the ditch where where the seam line is, just here, and then I've made the binding generous enough that if it covers the stitching line on the back comfortably all the way round, you should catch it. So you know, providing you can see your line of stitching there is hidden by the folded binding on the back. If you do stitch in the ditch, you should catch it just fine. However, why make things awkward for yourself? We are making basically a little sampler or something scrappy for the kitchen, so make it easy. See, if you have a look just here, let me see if I can catch it very easily. I've actually used a decorative stitch to sew on my binding. I've got a little stitch that looks like a leaf on my sewing machine and it works perfect with the fall fabrics that I've got just here. So I've used this little stitch. As you can see, it's wider and therefore not only does it catch easily on the front just here, but as I turn it over, it catches, let's see if I can turn it to the light, it catches really easily on the back too, and there's absolutely no chance that I'm going to miss any of this binding because I'm using a nice wide stitch. So I suggest if you're an expert with the binding or you want to give yourself a challenge, then obviously stitch in the ditch and see how you get on. But if you just want to make it easy and get a really nice decorative and secure finish first time round, use either a zigzag stitch or some kind of decorative stitch and you'll get a lovely finish. So I'm going to do that now. So that's it, my binding has been sewn on. And I used that nice decorative stitch, made it easy on myself, given it a lovely decorative finish, and at the same time made sure that I caught the binding on the back. So now my two pocket pot holders are completed. I hope you've enjoyed following along and watching some new techniques today. Maybe Quilt-as-you-go was new to you, or even binding, and I hope you found the tips that I've given you today useful. I look forward to seeing you over at Sew Easy again soon. Thanks for following.